Every speaker has been told they can only have their opening remarks for 5 minutes. This is going to be more of a Q&A, and we're dealing with a huge subject, and that is how do you frame stability down the road, not just in Iraq, but across the region. And if I can ask the people in the back to be quiet as a courtesy to the panel. Excuse me, in the back. Thank you very much. We have a very distinguished panel. I'd like to introduce each one of them. Hoshyar Zebari needs no introduction. He was Foreign Minister of Iraq for more than a dozen years and then Minister of Finance. He can charm any government official in any country in the world.
Thank you.
Muwafiq Rubai is a former member of parliament and a national security advisor who has dealt with some of the trickiest security issues that Iraq has faced. I'm particularly glad that he's joined our panel. Third will be speaking Basmat Ozurk, who has served in Tehran, Rome, Egypt, Afghanistan, NATO, and is currently Deputy Undersecretary at the Ministry of Defense in Turkey. And then we have Elena Suponina, who is with the Russian Institute for Strategic Studies. She is well known for her work on Islam and Arab-Russian cooperation. Fifth, we have Hassan Ahmadian, with whom I had the pleasure of working in Russia recently and in Prague recently in 2 conferences. And finally, we have Tariq Mitri, who is director of the Isam Faris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. He served as Minister of Information, Culture, Interim Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Minister of the Environment. So, an extraordinary panel. I'm going to open with a very tough question. I've covered every war, revolution, and uprising in the Middle East since the 1973 war. I think the region has never been as dysfunctional. It has never been under greater threat, and it has never faced such a variety of challenges in every possible way, from basic electricity to the borders. Can this region even be sustained as it was defined a century ago? So each of these panelists will look at the issue of down the road, not just tomorrow or the day after Mosul, but what happens to this region and what kind of framework will work to stabilize Iraq, Syria, and this very unstable region. So I'm going to begin with Hoshyar. And so I ask you that basic question. Give us a framework, and don't tell me you're just waiting for the international powers to come in. We've got those experts down the road.
Thank you, Robin. Very nice to be with you here in Suleimania Forum. And thank Barham for inviting us. I'm really very honored that we have some old friends who have honored us. The Honorable Amr Moussa is with us, the former Secretary General of the Arab League, Nabil Fahmy, is a former colleague from Egypt, Foreign Minister, Mitri, again, whom we worked together in the Arab League for many years. I'm very, very pleased and honored, not to mention all other friends, but really I wanted to...
5 minutes, not the whole
5 minutes. As for the region, really this region is broken, unfortunately. And I think if you will put a line when that happened, in my view, looking back, you followed this region from 73, but I would say since Saddam's invasion of Kuwait, I think that was the turning point where the Arab countries were divided, the Muslim world was divided, was polarized. There are others who would say after the fall of Iraq in 2003, maybe that has finished it. But Iraq all along really was an important country in the region. It has very important roles to play as a balancing force. Iraq is not a normal country, unfortunately. I have to say this after all these years of fighting, of struggling to get it back on its feet, to play a constructive, positive role with all its potential. And really we have to blame ourselves, the politicians, for not succeeding with all the international help and support. There are no security structures or arrangements really for the region as such. And primarily because if you want to look at the broader Middle East, really you have to include some of the protagonists, Iran, Turkey, some people say even Israel could be a part of this, but really if we're talking about Gulf security region, I think it's very difficult to have such structure, mainly because of the deepened animosity and hostility between Iran and the GCC, between Iran, Saudi Arabia. Amr Moussa will remember many years ago we pushed very hard for some kind of a dialogue between the Arab with Iran, let's say, as we're having with Turkey, with Japan, but really that idea did not take off. Iraq has a better opportunity actually. Syria, when we look at it, is almost a failed state. And really it would be very difficult to reconstitute Syria again. Libya we don't know which way it's going. Yemen, the war in Yemen, the sectarian tensions. So all this, when we add together, really Iraq can have a positive role.
But what does that structure look like?
Well, that structure, really, Iraq has a divided loyalty between Iran on the one hand and between the United States, and it has to find its balance. Now, although Iraq is a strategic partner to the coalition, to the international community, but on the other hand, is also a member of another coalition that include Iran, Russia, Syria, and Iraq at the same time. So I think the Iraqi chances of overcoming its difficulties is better, as we've heard in the previous panels about the progress the security forces are making. We've heard the Prime Minister this morning giving some positive statements about moving toward more stabilization, but this year is an election year, and I personally think if our friends, our partner, the Shia, will go down the political majority rule, as some of them are claiming, that would be the end of a united Iraq. The country would be badly divided, even more fractured, because we have a lot of expertise and knowledge how dictatorship has emerged in Iraq from Abdul Karim Qasim to Saddam Hussein onward. Really, this country cannot be ruled by one sect or one party. It has to be through partnership. It has to be through inclusiveness. Otherwise, you will create more divisions for the country. So we hope that wisdom will prevail. In fact, that this is only electioneering slogans, because that will lead automatically, if you abolish the parliamentary system, have a presidential system, you have this money at your disposal, the society is divided, you have foreign intervention, then a new dictatorship is imminent. And this would be rejected by the overall, I think, majority of the Iraqis.
Thank you. Muwafiq, I want you to take the issue and look even more forward. You have a long experience in national security. And I'm interested because everyone in this room really wants to know, how are we going to make it work? How is the world, how is Iraq, how are all the very troubled governments inside the Middle East? In very specific terms.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The Prime Minister made it easy for us. I'm going to speak in Arabic because he has spoken in Arabic. الأخ السيد رئيس الوزراء عبد الطريق أمامنا للحديث باللغة العربية. لابد أن نتحدث باللغة العربية. أنا أعتقد أنه العراق يعيش في منطقة نسميها نقاط التماس أو خطوط التماس بين العالم العربي والعالم غير العربي، الفارسي، الكردي، التركي، وهذا يجعل بلد قلق. وهذا الذي يعني يربط المناطق اللي بالعراق، فلذلك نلاحظ خطوط التماس قلقة. الشيء الآخر، العراق يعيش منذ 2003 مثل الوادي الذي يعيش بين 4 جبال بركانية، وهذه ال4 جبال بركانية تقذف بإنتاجاتها في هذا الوادي. الجبال البركانية من الشرق إيران وطموحاتها النووية، ومن الغرب إسرائيل وترسانتها النووية، ومن الشمال تركيا وأكبر اقتصاد بالمنطقة وطموحاتها العثمانية الجديدة، ومن الجنوب السعودية كمركز ثقل ديني وسياسي واقتصادي كذلك. فلذلك تلاحظون أنه نلاحظ هذا البلد قلق، لأنه يحاولون قسم من هاي الدول الإقليمية تحاول تصفي حساباتها في هذا الوادي. فلذلك الطريق إلى الأمام هو طريق واحد إلى الأمام، لا يوجد طريقان حقيقة. الطريق إلى الأمام هو عراق موحد فيدرالي صحيح، ولكن موحد وقوي وفاعل بالمنطقة، ينبني على أساس هذا الجبل. لا أقول أنه جبل بركاني، ولكن جبل يصد ويردع يوازن الجبال المحيطة بهذا البلد. هاي النقطة. النقطة الأخرى، الطريق إلى توحيد هذا البلد هو من خلال التطور الاقتصادي والمالي والسياسي والأمني، من خلال أغلب الدول التي توحدت حول تطوير أنهارها، يعني حول النهرين يمكن صناعة والزراعة والتجارة حول النهرين، وهو النهران يكونان هو العمود الفقري الذي يمكن أن يثبت الوحدة العراقية، يعني هذا البلد يبقى متماسك. الشيء الذي أريد أقوله هو الآتي: الطريق إلى الأمام أنه بعد داعش ينبغي تقوية وتعزيز سيادة الدولة على الأرض العراقية، تعزيز سيادة واستقلال العراق من خلال خروج جميع القوات الأجنبية التي دعوناها والتي لم ندعوها من هذا البلد. عملية تعزيز سيادة هذا البلد باستقلاله وسيادته، هذا هو طريق إلى الأمام. النقطة الأخيرة أو قبل الأخيرة هي تعزيز سلطة الحكم، سلطة الدولة. الآن السلطة غير، يعني لا تصل إلى كل أركان الدولة. سلطة الحكم والحكومة لا تصل إلى كل أركان الدولة، وهذا واضح أنه بعد أن تحدث الأخ يعني الذي تحدث عن الحشد الشعبي، بعد الحشد الشعبي أي واحد يحمل السلاح هذا ميليشيا. فلذلك احتكار السلاح بيد الدولة هذا الطريق إلى الأمام. الدولة، فلذلك الأخ السيد رئيس الوزراء دعا إلى أن كل القوات النظامية وغير النظامية تكون تحت قيادة القائد العام للقوات المسلحة، تحت قيادة الدولة العراقية، من أجل بناء جيش قوي يحمي حدود البلد، يحافظ على سيادة هذا البلد، ويفرض سلطة العراق، سلطة الحكومة الاتحادية على هذا البلد. الشيء الأخير الحقيقة هو ما يدور حول موضوع كردستان قبل أي شيء وبعده. أنا من الناس الذين يؤمنون بحرية الشعوب وحرية الأمم في تقرير مصيرها. هذا أمر أقرته الأمم المتحدة، أقرته معاهدة جنيف، أقرته أبسط حقوق الإنسان، لا غبار على ذلك. ولكن هل نريد تدوير قضية كردستان كما يريد البعض ويفلت زمام الأمر من عندنا، أو أقلمة قضية كردستان بحيث أنه ننظر لحلول لكردستان بين في طهران أو في اسطنبول أو في الرياض أو في القاهرة؟ أين ننظر؟ أم لا من القضايا، نحدد القضايا المهمة التي بين بغداد وأربيل التي هي 5 و6. قضية الحدود المتنازع عليها، وألطف شيء قال الأخ رئيس الوزراء أنه هذه الحدود التي يعني نتنافس على تطويرها إن شاء الله، أو المناطق التي نتنافس على تطويرها. الشيء الآخر قضية البيشمركة، الثالث أنه النفط والغاز، الرابع المنافذ الحدودية، الخامس الموازنة الموازنة اللي هي 17% وغيرها. هذه الموضوعات محددة. أنا أعتقد إذا كانت هناك حكومة قوية فاعلة في بغداد يمكن أن توقع هذه التسوية التاريخية المصيرية اللي بين بغداد وأربيل. إذا حكومة ضعيفة ومهلهلة وغير قادرة على أن تقود على الأقل 80% من مجلس النواب معها، سوف لا تستطيع أن توقع هذه التسوية بين بغداد وأربيل. فلذلك الطرح يكون هنا على الأغلبية السياسية على عموم الوطن. وعندما نطرح الأغلبية السياسية لا نعني بها الأغلبية الطائفية ولا الأغلبية القومية ولا أي أغلبية أخرى، إنما الأغلبية السياسية التي ترعى مكونات الشعب العراقي على مستوى عموم الوطن، وهي أغلبية وطنية. يعني من أغلبية في هذا المكون ما تتحالف مع أغلبية في هذا المكون وتتحالف مع أغلبية ثالثة في المكون الثالث، بحيث أنه تصنع الأغلبية السياسية على عموم الوطن. هذا هو الطريق إلى الأمام. أعتقد أي طريق آخر أي طريق آخر هو، لأنه إذا نظرنا إلى العراق على أساس خطوط العرض فهم كرد وسنة وشيعة. هذا ما يريده بعض الغربيين، وهذا ما يريده بعض الإقليميين، لأنه ينظر العراق على أساس خطوط العرض، وهذا يعزز لأنه يدخل منا الإقليمي والدولي بين أبنائنا. أعتقد أنه وحدة العراق عندما ننظر إليه على أساس الجيوبوليتكس من الطولي، على أساس الأغلبية السياسية التي هي من تبدأ من أربيل وتبدأ من كردستان إلى الوسط، إلى بغداد، إلى البصرة. هذا أعتقد هو الحل إلى الأمام. شكرا لكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thank you. Basmat, you come from Turkey. You've had experience in both the Foreign Ministry and the Ministry of Defense. Tell us how you look 10 years down the road, what role Turkey wants to play, what Turkey would like to see in the region, and what it can do to contribute to that.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm grateful to be here in Süleymaniye. It's a first for me.
Can you hear him?
Now you can hear, maybe. I'm grateful to be here, and I thank the hosts, and I'm not going to count one by one everybody. So I have to get closer to the microphone. It's a great pleasure to be here. But I have precious moments, so I have to directly get into the top topic, as you pointed out. First of all, I think this region in Turkey should not be considered in isolation from the rest of the world. I think, some good news. Maybe I can say that it is not only our region which is in crisis, because also other parts of the world are also in a crisis situation. The West is also in a crisis situation. States are failing or failed not only in the East but also in the West. So I'm going to bring here a different vision than traditional Orientalism, because the Orientalist view tend to take countries of the East and examine them like in laboratory, one by one, and make great solutions and recommendations for each and all of them. Since I served also in Afghanistan for more than 4 years, I personally also experienced the problems Afghanistan faced. And Afghanistan has been facing these problems since 1979, as you know. And it is not only Iraq, it is not Syria, it is Libya, it is Mali, it is Yemen, it is Somalia. It is much greater part of the region which is in a crisis situation. The feeling of insecurity is not also endemic to the people of this region. The feeling of insecurity now is something also the people of the West feel deeply. And that's why we see like tectonic shifts also in the West. We have seen it in the latest elections in the United States. We have seen it also in recent referenda in Europe. The European Union, once upon a time, a beacon of civilization, a source of attractive club for the rest, is now in identity crisis. And one of the most important members of European Union is exiting the European Union. And other European countries are going in populist tendencies which result in racist, xenophobic, Islamophobic consequences. So we cannot consider what is happening in this region in isolation from the rest of the world. In today's world, the armies of the countries are not fighting with each other face to face in battlefields. We now have a new type of warfare, which is called hybrid warfare. In this kind of warfare, countries, big powers, regional powers, don't use their own armies directly, but they have subcontractors, proxies, and they use also and abuse all kinds of sources, instability, problems in the countries concerned. So first of all, it is our duty as seen from Turkey, including Turkey itself, that we would like to see stable, secure, safe, developing, strong countries. It is also in our interest to see, for example, a strong, united Iraq. It is in our best interest to see such an Iraq. It is in our best interest to see such a Syria. It is in our best interest to see the whole region in this position. But we need reforms, not only in this region, not only in Iraq, Syria, Turkey itself, which is undergoing through many reforms. But we need reform also at the top of the international community. United Nations in a crisis situation also. The 5 permanent countries cannot dictate the fate of the rest of the world anymore. It should be democratized as well. So advising democracy in this part of the world is easy, but all those who are advising democracy in this part should be honest, and they should also advise the same and do the same in the United Nations, its bodies, in the international community. We need more democracy also in Europe. They need to also be tied to their founding values. And that's why Turkey's model, in our case, is to continue our path towards further democratization, further development, so that we will become part of the most civilized world. Wherever it is, in the east, south, north, or west, it doesn't matter. And we would like to see our neighbors in the best possible condition, democratic. Because in order to stay united, strong, we need to be also strong in economy, in politics, in democracy, in science, in technology. And regional cooperation, genuine regional cooperation is a must. There is no other way. I think we have been living in this region for centuries together. Kurds, Turks, Arabs, Persians, Yazidi, we can talk to each other. We don't need interpreters. We don't need third countries or UN bodies to make mediation between us. So my suggestion is to talk to each of us genuinely, sincerely, share the problems in perceptions and try to find solutions, common solutions to these problems. And in this context, I should like to say that, not as a diplomat I am saying, but wholeheartedly, the speech delivered this morning by Dr. Haidar El-Abadi, His Excellency the Prime Minister of Iraq, was a great speech. I can understand it. And we can join word by word whatever he has said. So this is the right path, and we need to go on this way. And I can also tell you that in case of Turkey, because Turkey, as you see, a NATO member, part of Western Club, which is a candidate country for the EU since I was born, more than 60 years, but the EU is fading away before we can join. but we are a challenger also. We are considered a maverick. That is why in Turkey we have faced also another postmodern coup attempt by the Fethullah terrorist organization, which is inspired by some foreign countries maybe. And in the context that because Turkey is challenging the West, the Western dominance or injustice, there was an attempt to change democratically elected government in Turkey with a coup attempt. But we resisted because Turkey has become a mature country in terms of democracy. We have maybe a long way to go, but we all have a long way to go. We will have to continue on this path together, and we have to have self-confidence in ourselves. We can do it before, after, in the future, at all times. And I hope also our Western countries will keep their democratic values and will also join us in the democratized, future, prosperous international community one day before I die. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can I ask the people in the back, please, to be quiet? If you want to talk, please leave the room. Okay, I'm going to skip down to Alina. Russia has played an increasingly visible role in the Middle East. I'm very interested in your perspective on what Russia's interests are in creating a new framework for stability. And I'm serious about the people in the back. Could you please be quiet? If you could take a look again, really down the road, what you think Russia's interests are and how you think Russia can contribute, what its vision is for a very unstable region.
Thank you. I will speak Russian. Oh, sorry, I am joking. سأتكلم باللغة العربية إذا ما في مانع. السيدات السادة المحترمين، يسرني أن أشارك في هذا المؤتمر ويسعدني أن يصادف افتتاح المؤتمر في هذا اليوم، وهو يوم 8 آذار يوم المرأة العالمي. وأحيي بهذه المناسبة السيدات الحاضرات وكل نساء كردستان والعراق والعالم، وكل عام وأنتم بخير. سالينا بيروز بجنان. المرأة كأم وزوجة ومربية، ودكتور برهم صالح اليوم تكلم عن أمه، فبالتأكيد المرأة دائما تسعى للاستقرار، والذي ينقصنا في هذه الأيام وفي هذه المنطقة بالذات للأسف. السؤال كيف ممكن الخروج من هذه الأزمة؟ هل يمكن أن التخلص من هذه المشاكل ومن الإرهاب بالذات بالوجود إلى السلاح فقط؟ من يعتقد ذلك يذكرني بقصة ملا نصر الدين، وعندما فقد مفتاح بيته وبدأ يبحث عن هذا المفتاح تحت الفانوس، وعندما سئل أين فقدت المفتاح فقال هناك في العتمة، وسئل إذن لماذا تفتش هنا فأجاب لأن هنا الضوء. فالإرهاب هي الظاهرة، فعلينا أن نبحث عن الأسباب، وهي مو بالضرورة أن تكون في الظاهرة، ممكن أن تكون في العتمة. والحلول أيضا لن تكون بسيطة، ستكون فهي شاملة ومتشابكة. والحديث عن هذا الموضوع يدفعني إلى التجربة الروسية في عملية أستنا في كازاخستان حول سوريا. استنتجنا من هذه العملية أنه ومن هذه المفاوضات أنه إلى جانب العمل العسكري توجد هناك الحاجة الملحة لتوحيد الجهود الدولية وعلى كل المستويات بما فيها الاجتماعي والعسكري والسياسي والإنساني. وهناك أمثلة عديدة لنتائج هذه المفاوضات، منها مثلا عمل الشرطة الروسية في مدينة حلب. هناك شرطة من شيشان وداغستان وأنا أعرف تماما انطباعات حتى المعارضة السورية عن عمل الشرطة هذه، وهي انطباعات إيجابية جدا. وأنا سمعت ما يقوله سكان مدينة حلب عن هذه التجربة، فهي تجربة برأيي إيجابية جدا، ممكن أن تتكرر في مدن سورية أخرى، لأنها ليس فقط تجربة عسكرية، هي أيضا تجربة إنسانية واجتماعية. فالجهود المبذولة من قبل روسيا وإيران وتركيا على كل هي بحاجة للمزيد من الدعم من قبل اللاعبين الآخرين. نحن نتعاون مع العراق، نتعاون في موضوع تبادل المعلومات وفي غيرها من المواضيع. روسيا أكثر من مرة عربت عن نيتها بضرورة التعاون مع أمريكا، وحتى في شهر مايو في السنة الماضية وزير خارجية روسيا سيد سيرغي لافروف اقترح علنا للأمريكان خلينا نتعاون في موضوع استعادة مدينة رقة. لم يكن جواب إيجابي من قبل إدارة باراك أوباما. الآن نتمنى إن شاء الله أن تستجيب إدارة دونالد ترامب بشيء من التعاون مع روسيا. على كل روسيا مستعدة لهذا الشيء، نحن مستعدين للتعاون، منفتحين لهذا الشيء. فنحن ممكن أن نتعاون في مكافحة الإرهاب، ممكن نتعاون في تثبيت الهدنة في سوريا، والنجاح في هذه الجهود سوف يساعد كتجربة عملية لصياغة برنامج استراتيجي لقطع الجذور التي تغذي الإرهاب. وهذه الجذور هي موجودة في كل من العراق وليبيا وأفغانستان وغيرها من بلدان العالم. فهنا بودي أن أشير إلى الأهمية الخاصة لهذه القضية بالنسبة لروسيا. وما بين الأسباب المتعددة يكفينا في شيء غلط بالمايك. ما بين الأسباب المتعددة يكفينا أن نذكر ما قاله الرئيس بوتين منذ بضعة أيام حول عدد الناطقين باللغة الروسية في صفوف الداعش في كل من العراق وسوريا، وكان يتكلم استنادا على المعلومات الاستخباراتية الروسية، وقال بأن عدد الناطقين باللغة الروسية المنخرطين بالداعش هم لا يقل عن 9000 شخص، ما بينهم 4000 من روسيا نفسها و5000 من دول الاتحاد السوفيتي السابق الأخرى. وحسب علمنا أنا أختتم الآن، حسب علمنا معطيات الولايات المتحدة هي تقريبا متشابهة وقريبة. فهذا الواقع يظهر كما نحن معنيين بنجاح مكافحة الإرهاب في العراق وسوريا. واليوم أنا سئلت الأولوية لمن، للعراق أو لا لسوريا؟ فجوابي على هذا السؤال الأولوية لتوحيد الجهود وللعمل المشترك ولكي نتوصل للنتيجة، والنتيجة هو الانتصار، النصر. فكل أملي أن تكون نتائج هذا المؤتمر تصب في تحقيق هذا الهدف، وشكرا.
Thank you very much. Hassan, you are the youngest member of this panel by far. And I'd be interested in your perspective.
Okay.
Representing the young, representing Iran, what your vision, what Iran's vision is down the road for this region. How can we get beyond the tensions between Iran and its neighbors in order to stabilize the region? How can we tackle this huge issue that threatens, as someone rightly pointed out, to make Iraq, already has made Iraq, a kind of proxy war for those elsewhere in the region?
Okay, thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present my views. I think the main question is that, which is obviously your question, what is the, what this disequilibrium in the region stems from? Where does it come from? And how to tackle this disequilibrium and instability and insecurity in the region? I think there are three concepts that we should bear in mind to address the issues of insecurity, instability, disequilibrium in our region for a more peaceful, prosperous Middle East in the future, inshallah. The first concept is threat perception. There are those countries in the region that perceive Iran as a threat. Why? Because Iran is a regional power. They don't want it to act as such. They want it to stick to its own borders. But Iran, if geopolitics has taught us something, Iran cannot secure itself and meet its national security obligations and needs without acting as a regional power, because it is a regional power. And but for Iran, does Iran see its regional rivals as threats to its national security? I don't think so. For Iran, the United States, Israel, with a regime change agenda are the threats. It doesn't perceive Saudi Arabia as a threat. It doesn't perceive Turkey as a threat. They are rivals for sure, but not threats. So that's why Iran has been open to discussions and dialogue in order to further our mutual interests. It has shown its willingness. It has been self-confident enough to come up with this dialogue forum proposal and all the things that I'm sure you're aware of. The second concept is exclusion, which is basically if it cannot succeed internally and regionally. If this region, the Kurdish region, this beautiful city tells us, its modern history tells us anything, it's that the excluding minorities cannot succeed, cannot bring about sustainable development and peace and prosperity to our region. And the same goes to the regional level. You cannot exclude countries by clinging to their, sect, ethnic, characteristics. No country should be excluded. Exclusion is a recipe for more chaos and disequilibrium in the region. The third concept, I'm shortening my presentation because of the limit of the time. The third concept is demonization of others. We cannot demonize each other. Demonizing one another cannot bring us peace and stability in the region. I think in the past 5 years, demonizing communities and states has been unprecedented. The demonizing communities has brought about, created a fertile ground for even more insecurity in the communities, within the states, and demonizing other states has brought or rendered states, stable states to fragile states, and fragile states to failed states. And this will go on unless we stop this, demonizing others. Demonization cannot lead us to anything but more chaos and disequilibrium in the region. So I think if we are really for peace and stability in the region, we have to tackle these issues. By perceiving one another as threats, we gradually close the door for dialogue. By trying to exclude one another, we refuse the very essence of coexistence in the region, which cannot be sustainable in a region we are bound to, and we are to share together and live together in. It's not a choice to make. And by demonizing one another, we are politicizing communities, which is the fertile ground for empowering radicals in the region. But we have to tackle these issues. We have to stop demonizing, excluding, and perceiving one another as threat. But recent realities tell us that not all people think the same way. With Trump being elected, there are those people who are hopeful that he will do what decades of their efforts couldn't bring about to the region, or cutting the head of the snake or so. So I think, basing our judgment about the regional actors based on, this perceptions that we are bound to fight against one another have rendered us to this stage, and I think we have to stop this. We have to not to, be so into internationalization of our regional affairs. We have to work to one another. There are so many recipes by think tanks and people, decision makers and thinkers, to resolve our regional problems internally and regionally, at the core of all of which comes dialogue, trust building. These are not, internationalized issues. International powers cannot bring this to our region. We have to work them out ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to take my prerogative as the chair to ask you for an answer to a question, and you have 1 minute.
Okay.
I think everyone in this room is aware of the term Shiite crescent. It was first used in an interview with King Abdullah of Jordan with me. And afterwards they called and said, no, you can't use that term. And I said, look, it's on the record, which is a warning to all of you. If you talk to me, you're on the record. But my question is, when many people in this region are afraid of what Iran's intentions are, what do you say about the idea of a Shiite crescent? And again, you've got 1 minute.
Well, the Shia crescent, or the Iran being a Shia actor, I think, has been used as a rhetoric to deter Iran from playing a regional role. Iran has never, sought to limit its regional capability within the Shia sect. Ever since the revolution, the Islamic revolution in Iran, the Ayatollahs in Iran, the leadership in Iran, have never used the Shia rhetoric. They have always spoken about Islamic unity. Now you can differ with them, but the Shia crescent is if it is anything in the region, it is a result of a rhetoric brought by Iran's rival to deter it, but it backfired against them, against their internal security and against their regional security. That's it, in 1 minute.
Thanks. Last but not least, Tariq, I want to ask you. Lebanon went through its own civil war for 15 years, and it dealt with the issues, as Basamat rightly and wisely pointed out, of identity. And I lived in Beirut for 5 of those years, and I was back last fall. And it strikes me that Lebanon still hasn't dealt with many of those issues of identity. You have a ceasefire. I'm not convinced that, the tension is all is over. But based on your experience, Lebanon's experience, help this audience understand, what is it? How do you get beyond the primordial identities of tribe and sect and ethnicity? What are the lessons, and what would you recommend? What do you see as the answer to this huge problem that plays out in Iraq and across the region?
Thank you. Pleased to be here. Sound bites. Lebanon was a battleground for regional wars and international interventions. That's not the case now. Syria is the battleground for regional wars and international interventions. Concerned about the problem of weakness of state institutions, Lebanon and throughout the region, the fragility of national cohesion, Lebanese problem, but also a regional problem. The collapse of the old order had with it the collapse of the state institutions, and then people are back to their primordial identities, as you rightly said. And those subnational primordial identities make people lose, in some places, their aspiration for a state for all. And therefore, they are tempted to beg for a power structure that can protect one community from the other. That would be my first point. My second point is that conflicts, whether in Lebanon or in other parts of the Arab world, that have undermined what is left of the state, had themselves become legitimating factors for the regimes. And violence is a policy by default. My third point is we celebrate the 100th anniversary of Sykes-Picot. Everybody talks about it, but there was this kind of paradox with Sykes-Picot. Sykes-Picot divided the region along what we thought were artificial borders, French and the British. Now those so-called artificial borders seem to be resistant. That's the paradox. The regional order has collapsed, but borders that were drawn by colonial powers are still there. There is no evidence of an emerging order. Regionally powerful countries such as Egypt, Iraq, Syria are constrained by their internal problems and not playing the regional role they used to play. Russia's intervention in Syria, 2015, has ensured the Syrian regime's survival, but didn't enhance its role in the region. Quite the contrary, it has revealed U.S. ineffectiveness and therefore creating a new geopolitical moment in the region. It's still premature to see how this moment will develop. Moscow has a vision, I believe, you can correct me, for the region, where for a regional security order, which is the subject of our debate, where they value regime security over human security. Fifth point, what used to be a conflict between moderate Arabs, that's something that also Lebanon had suffered from, and the resistance camp, al-Mumana. It has structured politics in the early years of this century, but now it has given way to an increasingly Shiite-Sunni proxy war across many borders. In Lebanon it's latent, in other countries it's explosive. I come to Daesh and I conclude. Again, Daesh reshaped the jihadi threat. The jihadi threat was there in every country, Arab country. No state supports Daesh, but each state has a different perception of Daesh as a threat and different prioritization of how to fight, which makes fighting against Daesh extremely complicated, more complicated than it looks. And the fear is if Daesh, and inshallah Daesh will be soon defeated in Iraq and Syria, strands of radicalism of another sort might emerge. Wherever state failure opens up an opportunity for radical groups. The defeat of Daesh will pose anew the problem of inclusionary politics. Identity politics is not inclusionary, it is exclusionary. And unless you deal with this, you cannot defeat Daesh. My last comment is that there is a perceivable thirst for the state in Lebanon and everywhere else, I believe. But this is, no matter how deep our fears, our uncertainties, you hear from opinion polls, from people you talk to, from intellectuals, the books they write, there is a thirst for the state. But this thirst for the state should not be misunderstood as a demand for authoritarianism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm curious. I want to involve the audience, and then we'll open up to questions. Not in terms of your own belief. You don't have to necessarily tell me what you think about yourself. But when you look at the region and the people of the region, how many here believe that the greatest threat is because of a Sunni Shiite Aryan division in the region? Not many. I'm really surprised. How many think...
People understood your question, I think.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, Mafi Arabi. How many people think the greatest threat in the region is because of sectarian differences? Specifically Sunni Shiite, but yeah. How many think, as Tariq said, that there is a thirst for a state? How many of you think that there is, as Tariq said, a thirst for a modern state, that is how people want to have their identity defined first and foremost? Are you Iraqi first? Are you Shiite or Sunni or Yazidi or Shabak first? Yeah, there is a perceivable. Yes? All right. Yeah? All right, you ask a question.
Look. Okay. So, the subject is very important and too wide. I wanted, but there is no time to comment on what Hushyar, Muwafaq, and Tariq have said. But my question, because of the shortness of time, is addressed to the other three. The representative of Russia, of Iran, and of Turkey, the Astana group. The question is, do you believe that three of you can determine the future of Syria without the participation of the Arab group, of the neighbors of Syria? Do you think that, or do you believe that it is easy, and this is addressed perhaps to the Russians and Americans, that they can repeat the experience of Sykes-Picot, as Tariq Mitri was saying, in the 21st century? Do you think that Syria, the Syrian problem, could be resolved without taking into consideration the views of the immediate neighbors like Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan? Do you think that it is possible, it is conceivable that the Arab world will just sit and say, yes, sir, since Iran has accepted, since Turkey has accepted, since Russia and America have decided, so we have to just get ready to accept what they say? I want to ask you this question, and I want you to bear in mind that this region has changed and cannot accept the imposition of a solution regardless of the interests and the will of the region in general. I suggest that from the end of this month, after the Arab Summit, there will be a president of the summit, Arab Summit, it's Jordan, the King of Jordan. So Jordan can claim that I represent the Arab world. They should be there when the discussions about the future of Syria are held, not in the conference room, but in the kitchen. You cannot do that alone. Your solution, whatever ideas, are going to be irreceivable at the end of the day without the participation of the people of this region and of the Arab world.
Nabil Fahmy. You want to comment and then we'll get answers. Can you provide a microphone down here, please?
Thank you. A very short question to our Iranian colleague. You said that Iran decided that it cannot defend its national interest without pursuing geopolitics. how far does geo go, and what does politics mean? Is it foreign politics or also politics in domestic affairs?
All right, so we have a couple of questions here. Let's take those who want to answer it. Sure, Basmat, you start.
Question, Mr. Amrusa, with all due respect. We are not in a position to impose any solution on Syria. As Turkey, we had been so patient for so long not to intervene in Syria. But because the international community has failed miserably. The United Nations Security Council was blocked. There was no decision on the crisis, on the conflict in Syria. And we were receiving the threat of not terrorism, terrorists themselves from Syria entering into Turkey and conducting terrorist acts. We host now 3 million Syrians. The largest number of refugees in the world, registered refugees, are in Turkey. So we have paid a huge price because of the conflict in Syria. So Turkey is not in a position to impose anything on Syria, and I don't think you are right that it can be decided by a limited group of countries, the fate of Syria. This is not our intention. Turkey is trying to protect its own national security. It has become a national security threat for us. And Syria is not the only problem. The terrorism threat is not emanating only from Syria. It is from also emanating from this part of the world, as you know very well. And we were the only country fighting against Daesh, other than Iraqi army, the only Western country, I should say, or Western and Eastern country, fighting Daesh face to face, chest to chest, not hiding behind anybody. We lost soldiers, equipment, many lives, just to protect our own national security interests. So it is not our intention to impose anything on Syria, on Iraq, or on any of our neighbors. We would like to live in a peaceful neighborhood because we lost also connection with the rest of the Middle East because of the conflicts in Syria and Iraq. And the fight in Syria and Iraq, and moreover in the greater world, is not only between regional countries. It is also global competition. It is regional competition, national competition, subnational competition. We need to talk and find solutions here. Turkey is only trying to protect its own national security interests by also working closely with Russia, with the United States, with Iran, and we are ready to work with anybody if it can help to find a solution. But as you see in the Geneva, there is no hope. It is like a fake now a process. It is not producing any political outcome. So how long we can just continue to watch this tragedy? Thank you.
Did anyone else want to weigh in? Hoshyar and Hassan then?
I would really comment generally. I think now Russia, the United States, the international communities, state actors, non-state actors are all united to defeat Daesh. I mean, the question would be, what would be the shape of this region after the defeat of Daesh? It's very important. And here I think all these regions will think about the future, including Iraqi Kurdistan, about where they could find the position, how to position themselves, especially if our arrangements with Iraq is not working or hasn't worked as we planned it initially or originally. And I think this would be the same for other regions too. Me and you, remember, shared some discussions before about some changes. Now, Sykes-Picot, many people talk about it, is really still there. The border are holding, but there are a lot of pressures in order to make those borders more justice to different people, to different. As for Amr Musa's comment, I agree really 100%. Although I'm not an Arab, but I felt really ashamed, you see, talking about the future of an Arab country like Syria, in Astana, and there was no Arab presence whatsoever. It was Iran, Turkey, Russia, let's say. Jordan later came, actually, after that as an advisory, but these were the three. And even they were questioning whether to invite the United States or not, I mean, by regional countries. So anyway, I think this approach will change under the new administration. All the indications shows that this new U.S. administration may have more positive, let's say, input in this.
After this question? No more questions. All right. So I'll let everybody who has not spoken have a last word. But on Amr Musa's point, you know, the fundamental question is, can the Arabs do it alone? Can they figure out what, if Sykes-Picot doesn't work, or the Arabs, the people, the inhabitants of the region figure it out by themselves? And do they need international intervention? Everyone I've talked to says they want American help or Russian help, or they basically want to go beyond the region. And I have news for you. You may think the the new administration is going to play a more active role. I'd bet you a dinar on that.
Okay.
So those who haven't spoken, Alina first, and then we'll run down and let Muwafaq have the last word. But briefly.
اوكي شكرا briefly. انا اؤيد بشده ما قاله السيد عمرو موسى، لانني انا بالذات كنت اتكلم عن هذا الشيء في كلمتي انا، انه حتى روسيا وايران وتركيا بحاجه للمزيد من الدعم من قبل الاخرين. وعمليه أستنا هي خبره ايجابيه برايي، وهي مستمرة، هي لا تأتي كإلغاء لجنيف أو بديل لجنيف. روسيا على فكرة تنظر لعملية جنيف ولفريق دمستورة مع كل الاحترام، ونتوقع أن تكون هناك بعض النتائج فيما بعد. وروسيا طبعا لم تشارك في أي اتفاقيات سرية حول تقسيم المنطقة أو شيء من هذا النوع، هذا غير موجود. نتذكر سايكس بيكو، روسيا دائما كانت تعتز أنها لم تشارك في سايكس بيكو، ونحن نعتز أن روسيا لم تأتي في تاريخها كقوة مستعمرة إلى منطقة الشرق الأوسط. ما عندنا هذه الخبرة ولم تكن.
Thank you. Hassan, you want to go next?
On His Excellency's point, I totally agree. We cannot exclude anyone. But you see, actually, the Iranian official, stance is the same. They say that we cannot exclude anyone, just as other states cannot determine the Syrian destiny and impose it on them. Iranians, Russians, and Turks cannot impose a solution on Syria, denying other Arab actors that have been present and have a stake, and they have to be there. You cannot exclude anyone. Actually, in Vienna, you of all people know that Iran insisted and preconditioned its presence by the presence of Iraq and Egypt. And that happened because Iran insisted on it. Iran's, outlook towards Syria and even Iraq has been multilateral in real politics. They have been asking other nations to be involved, to be there, to forge something and get rid of this mess in the region. But you see, there are countries that cannot accept Iran's presence. Actually, Iran has been subject to exclusion, not the other way around. And they couldn't, or they didn't want to be there because Iran was there. And about the second question, well, history tells Iran, one of the main criticisms that revolutionaries posed against the Shah was his involvement in the region. And they, after the revolution, they clung to that. They withdrew from the region. They didn't want to act as a regional power, act as a regional actor. But what happened? I mean, we were subject to invasion for 8 years. Millions of people hurt, killed, injured. Cities were destroyed. This told Iran that you cannot, fulfill your national security needs without acting as a regional actor and power. Without that, you will be in jeopardy in your neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tarek.
Just a footnote to Amr Moussa. A footnote to Amr Moussa. I think there was a time where Syria was a bargaining chip in the hands of the Soviet Union, then Russia, and the Iranian Islamic Republic in its relationship with the US. And that's over. That's good news in a way, and therefore Syria in and for itself, Syria as an Arab country is back to be on the table as an Arab country and not as a bargaining chip anymore.
Thank you. And last but not least, Muwafiq, you have the last word.
Thank you, Robin. I have a question to the audience. I wanted to ask the audience, what is the common denominator between Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan, the Taliban, and Zarqawi in Iraq, Khalifa Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in Iraq, al-Nusra in Syria, 9/11 in US, Boko Haram in Nigeria, the terrorists in Libya, Shabab in Somalia, Al-Qaeda in Yemen. What is the common denominator? What is the underlying reason? What's the root cause? What is the etiology behind all these? It's one thing. It's the ideology. It's not the politics of exclusion, not the economic development. It is only one reason. It's the ideology. And the ideology, this ideology has been spread all over the world. Billions and billions and billions of dollars been spent on it in the last 5 decades to spread this hatred ideology, this exclusion ideology. And the way forward is to tackle this ideology by ideology. Completely different narrative. We need to produce an alternative narrative to this hatred ideology. Thank you very much.
I don't think we answered the question of a new framework, but I have to say, exactly. But I have to say it was fascinating to listen to the diversity of views. There are no more questions. It's time for the next panel. I want to thank you all. Please join me in thanking our support panel.
Thank you. Good to see you.